Celtic transfer special. So in a week where Brendan Rodgers' tie dominated the headlines, is the lack of activity in the transfer window getting the Celtic fans in knots? Alongside me, Ryan Rowe, is David Friel, and we're going to discuss what has been a kind of quiet week on the transfer front for Celtic. Obviously now looking ahead to the Kairat Almaty game, they know who they're going to face. We've said before it's not exactly a tie that will push the board maybe towards making certain signings, but there's lots of rumours on the go. Now, one thing we'll touch on before we get to that, earlier in the week, Callum Osmond scored a goal for the B team, won a penalty, by all accounts played quite well. Falkirk this week as well, do we see, Callum Osmond, getting in?
I would be surprised. I think he is clearly a player that Brendan Rodgers wanted to bring in, wanted to have a look at, and I always felt from kind of speaking to people that Callum Osmond would potentially go out on loan, either this window or in January. I think for a player coming from the kind of PL2 down in England, obviously loads of potential, pretty young, not first team exposure at all. I think it's a bit of a jump to ask him or expect him, straight away to go in and be a first team player at Celtic. By all accounts he's doing well, good attitude, all that sort of stuff. And I just wonder whether, as you say, they scored the other night. I know for a fact there was a lot of lower league managers and Premiership managers there watching the game and clearly looking at who Celtic have, potentially getting loans there. And I would imagine Celtic currently are being inundated with requests to take him in loan because he's got a good pedigree, good background. I think it's up to Brendan Rodgers over the next couple of weeks to decide what's best for his development. Is he better staying and working with the likes of Adamida, Shinyamada and the other striker that Celtic probably will sign, we'll get onto that, or is he better going on loan and getting a real taste of first team football? Time will tell, but it wouldn't surprise me if Callum Osmond ended up at a Premiership team, maybe one of the ones in the bottom six or who are likely to kind of be in the bottom six, or a Championship team with real designs on promotion.
Talking about strikers, so a name that came up early in the window was Louis Munteanu, Romanian striker. The reports at the time were that Celtic had a bid in the region of £7 million booted out, and the club have spoke on it before. The club owner has actually come out and said that. There's been some strange reports from Romania this week suggesting that he is not quote-unquote injured, but he is refusing to play because he's owed money by the club. Wonder if he's been watching Pierre van Hooijdonk. Yeah. But it's another big name, a lot of money, and sort of murky waters over there.
It seems a bit of a circus surround a very talented player. Look, he's clearly a player. As you say, there was talk that Celtic had that bid early in the window. There's a lot of interest from France, I think Italy as well. Very gifted footballer, a great record last season, seems primed for a move to Europe. However, I think history can tell you that it's not always easy doing business with Romanian clubs. I think they want a certain value. I think if they don't get that value, they can be hard to deal with, maybe understandably. Also, I'd imagine, I think the environment and the culture as owners are very, very outspoken. They're out all the time doing press conferences. So this one is seeming to go that way as well by the looks of it. I would never rule it out because he's clearly a player of talent and someone who would fit the profile, Ryan. If you want to talk about the profile Celtic are looking for, if you're not going to get that tried and trusted one, at 27, 28, do you go for a younger one with huge potential that potentially could become a £25 million player down the line? I don't know. I think it would be hard to get a deal done. However, I think it's one that you would keep watching.
Yeah, so you mentioned there what was going to go on to next. If Celtic, well, we say if, perhaps when Celtic do sign another striker in this window, would you expect it to be someone of a, maybe around the age of Adamida, 23, 24, or could it actually be someone that's maybe pushing that sort of prime age?
I think it just depends on availability. I don't think Celtic set out, or Brendan Rodgers would say, I need to have a 21-year-old or I need to have a 31-year-old. I think it's just who's available for the right price. I know that might be simplistic and it can even come into loans. There could be a 29-year-old.
What if a Jamie Vardy was...
Well, I think Jamie Vardy's probably pushing it for various reasons. But I think if Celtic, someone comes to the table, a 30-year-old striker who's been around the block of huge quality, I don't think Celtic are going to say no. I would imagine permanent signings, if Celtic are going to spend a lot of money you always look for, and I think every club does that, you would always look for a bit of resale. So I think if Celtic are going to splash out, you speak about Montiano, if you're going to splash out 10 million euros in someone, you're not going to go for someone who's 27, 28. You just won't do that. I don't think any club would really do that in Celtic's situation. So I would imagine if it is a permanent signing, then it would be of a younger variety, probably someone who's a good track record so far, but clearly room for potential. But there'll be a lot of loans flying about in the last couple of weeks of the window. You know, I know a lot of people sneer at loan moves. I'm not one of them. I think that time has shown that you can get good loan moves out there.
Look at Jota.
Yeah, exactly. Jota, Cameron Carter-Vickers were both loans. Celtic turned into permanent deals. Odsonne-Edouard was another one, famously. I don't think you should be sniffy and say, oh, you should only be going for permanent players. As we speak about in the Rangers shows all the time, you need to go in two tracks. You need to think long term, but you also need to think short term. What's the best possible player you can get for that position? So right now, I wouldn't be ruling anything out, because things change, clubs change. The Premier League clubs will be putting out a 25-man squad soon and everything. Players that you didn't think were available right now might be available next week. You just don't know. I noticed, Stephen, there was a kind of a story during the week that Celtic had inquired about Jack Grealish, for example. Now, it's not my story. It could be. You know, I'm not doubting. I know Mike that wrote the story. I wouldn't doubt him in any sense. But I think that probably just shows you that you're looking at different profiles down the line.
So, one position that we know Celtic are interested in is wingers. It feels like every time we've been on recent transfer specials, it's been talking about a variation of these three wingers that all begin with B: Bischoff, Balikwisha and Brium. So, varying degrees of reports in the players' respective countries with regards to, again, maybe owners or club presidents coming out. We've said that we think Celtic could take at least one or two of these, but I think what's quite interesting is that, you know, two of them, certainly potentially even all three, predominantly operate in the left-hand side, which is that position that Jota occupied.
Yeah, and I think they would. I think Celtic. I mean, I know Nicholas Kuhn left. Look, to me, Celtic are looking for two wingers. I think they need. I think it's just a numbers game, as Brendan Rodgers keeps saying. I would imagine right now there's probably a. I would say Celtic actually need a right winger before they need a left winger. However, I think they also need to release Daizen Maeda to play through the middle, or at least have the option of playing him through the middle and not need him out in the left. So it wouldn't surprise me that way as well. But yeah, I mean, it's been a quiet couple of weeks, and I was off on Thursday, and it felt as if the rumour mill just started again. The amount of texts I got about his Balikwisha signing, and you know, speaking to people who are adamant Celtic already have secured a deal for a winger. Don't know who it is. Whether that's true or not, time will tell. Brendan Rodgers yesterday certainly seemed a bit more chirpy around signings. I think he called himself, or he referred to himself as philosophical about the whole situation. However, when I spoke to him last Friday before the Aberdeen game, he was a bit more, I don't mean downbeat, but you know, we asked him directly, do you expect to have signings in for the qualifier? And he said, well, I can't guarantee that, I don't know what's happening, there's nothing imminent. Yesterday he was asked exactly the same question, and it was hopefully. So I just felt as if there was a sign that things are starting to move for Celtic in this second wave of transfers, because as the Celtic board will probably say, look at the business that was done early in the season, early in the window, Kieran Tierney, Benjamin, Negrren, Ross Doohan, Shinyamada, all those that come in. It's been quiet for a while, and everybody obviously looks at this glaring hole in the Celtic squad and the Celtic team, the wings and up front. I just get a sense from the jungle drums beating a wee bit more over the last couple of days in Brendan Rodgers' demeanour. I think Celtic are edging a bit closer to getting players in.
Well, what I can say is that I was at Celtic Park when this was filmed, so yesterday on Thursday, for another Scottish Sun video, and we didn't see any signings being snuck in. The guys were out cleaning the statue, so unless that was a decoy, then maybe nothing in it, especially with a game on a Friday night as well. But a new name on the block that we don't really know much about is Umar Triori. The reports elsewhere are suggesting £2.5 million roughly, currently playing in the United Arab Emirates for Al Jazeera. It would be a odd place for Celtic to source their next player, but we've seen stranger things happen.
Look, there's a global search going on, clearly. I must admit, I know nothing about the player until his name popped up yesterday. I looked at his record, his track record, his background, his international appearances. It doesn't jump off the page at me thinking this is a guy Celtic want or need. I think the price tag that was quoted think it was africafoot.com. To me, you wouldn't be paying that for someone with such little kind of top level experience. However, it's so obscure that you begin to think, is there something in it? Time will tell on that one. I don't think he's one that the fans would be out there celebrating, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. I think it would be kind of a bit underwhelming signing for Celtic if it was to happen, but it did come out real left field yesterday, right?
Yeah, so the three that maybe would get the fans excited: Clement Bischoff, he was actually sent off for Brøndby last night. Jacob Breum's been linked for a long time, and as you said, Balikwisha, he can also play as a number 10, so I'm interested to see where Celtic would predominantly view him, but maybe more likely that one of those three is the ones that would get the fans off their seat.
Yeah, I would think so, and I feel as if I've been speaking about Michel-Ange Balikwisha for about 10 years now. He is, he's the new Matthias Kvistgaarden, he's the new one. Look, Celtic have been interested in him in the past. They clearly had an interest early in the window. There was a lot of rumours, so we're recording this on Friday, there was a lot of rumours on Thursday that, I'm not sure where it was coming from, I was just getting a lot of texts about it from people saying, I'm hearing this is nearly done, blah blah blah. I spoke to someone in Belgium who covers Antwerp, doesn't think it's at that stage, but wasn't ruling it out, if you know what I mean. He still felt there was a distance between valuations that can obviously change quickly. Something tells me that might happen down the line, and I feel as if I've said that a million times, but it's just not going away. It just isn't going away. He's not going anywhere else as well. I think for Antwerp's situation, they have a player who's in the last year of his contract, and you don't want to let it go too long. You want to understandably get the maximum value for him, and I suppose it's that game of at what stage do you say that offer we do accept. I'm led to believe the player is very, very keen to come to Celtic. We'll see what happens with that one. I've just got a funny feeling come the end of the window, and it might be the final day, that Balikwisha will be a Celtic player. Right,
so keep your eyes on that one, Celtic fans, and let us know in the comments what you think of the links that we've spoke about so far. Indeed, is there any players that you particularly want the club to go after? One that the club approached and has now gone elsewhere, Lennon Miller, he sealed his life-changing move to Italy. We know that there was a certain level of interest from Celtic. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's not necessarily going to be another John McGinn, but will Celtic slightly regret with the fee that was paid in the end?
Yeah, but I see a lot of this, and it's the Lennon Miller fee and the transfer and Udinese's status. Good club to develop, but not, people are asking how can Celtic let Udinese steal in. It's not the case. You can't use this as a stick to beat the board with at all. You can only sign a player who wants to come to your club, and that is not a slight in Celtic. I'm sure Rangers probably would have taken him as well. I know Ipswich were interested in him. There was other clubs as well in Belgium and France interested in Lennon Miller. I think he had his heart set on going to Italy. So
can you blame him?
No, I mean that's the thing. You can't blame him, but you also need to factor in that if a player just wants to go elsewhere and just would rather further his career out with Scotland, then there's nothing you can do. And I get the whole thing about people are saying, how can Celtic let this happen? It's not a case of that. It's a case of a player wanting to go abroad. A player who I'm sure has utmost respect for Brendan Rodgers and Celtic. I know his dad Lee has spoken about how good a coach Brendan Rodgers is and how he's a great developer of players.
Yep.
However, it's just a player who didn't want to stay in Scotland. He wanted to go and broaden his horizons. And to be honest with you, in the end, Celtic have offered another 2 or 3 million on top of what Udinese paid. I don't think it would have made any difference. Motherwell would clearly have accepted it. However, the player wanted to go abroad. So I think it's pretty unfair for anyone to use that to criticise the Celtic board. We've spoken so much about how Celtic are taking gambles with transfers just now, and I'm really surprised. We speak 72 hours maybe before, a wee bit longer than that, 4 days before the first qualifier, and I'm surprised Celtic don't have a winger and probably a striker in just now. But I think the Lennon Miller one is unfair to criticise Celtic over.
Just to put you on the spot, will Lennon Miller play more games for Udinese this season than he would have played if he went to Celtic? Because I think that's maybe where as well others look at it.
Look, I don't know
where his reason would come
and also
from.
I don't know the development plan for Lennon Miller as well. But you spoke about the John McGinn thing as well in terms of is it similar? It's maybe only similar in a sense that John McGinn, I remember vividly, we had the story that Celtic had bid for him at the time, and I remember Brendan Rodgers, come the end of that window especially, was really keen to get him. But I think John McGinn has spoken about it, that at the time, he probably wasn't going to get in the Celtic midfield. Because if my memory serves me correct, Celtic still had Scott Brown, Callum McGregor, Olivier Ncham, Tom Rogic, and maybe more. And I think Brendan Rodgers had made it clear to him that you might have to kind of bide your time, and it's not a case. Look, there was also stuff with the fee, there was also stuff between the clubs. Aston Villa eventually came in. John McGinn was going to go down and become their own main man. To go back to a roundabout way answering your question about Lennon Miller, I think if you look at the Celtic midfield just now, it's arguably the strongest area of the team. Now, the first choice three so far this season has been Callum McGregor, who'll play every week, Rio Hatate, who'll probably play every week, and Benjamin Negrren, who, for me, we're going to go and talk about this, will be the signing of the summer. Beyond that, you've got Arnie Engels, you've got Paulo Bernardo, who's not had a kick.
Yeah, he's not had a sniff.
And you've got Luke McCowan, who comes on and contributes so much for Celtic, and is a guy that you would always want in your Celtic squad. Boyhood fan, everything that brings as well. So, look, Lennon Miller, I have no doubt, would have been a very good Celtic player, but I think for his development, he has to go somewhere where he's going to play all the time, going to have a real chance of playing 25, 30 games. I don't think it's wrong to say that he would have had a real fight to get a Celtic game every single week. I think there's enough games to share around, but I'm not saying that was the reason why he didn't go to Celtic. However, I think he's made a shrewd move, go abroad. You look at the others, we've rhymed them off week after week. Alan Hickey, all these guys, Lewis Ferguson, Scott McTominay, Billy Gilmour, everybody. What a career choice he's made. Good luck to the kid. Really like him as a player. He's a nice boy, comes from a good family, and it's one of those ones. He might come back to Celtic in the future, but right now he's passed elsewhere.
Yep, absolutely. So, the signings of the window, so let's focus on who is at Celtic Park now. Signing of the window so far, you just touched on, we'll circle back, but maybe biggest question mark, or who are you still waiting to be convinced by?
I think you need a body of evidence here, right? I think Hayato Inamura is one who's been signed for the future. Nearly dropped my pen there. And I think he will probably be farmed out or not really feature that much. I just look at it, I think it's quite telling that the way Brendan Rodgers even sets his bench up, boxes need to be ticked. But just now Liam Scales is the auxiliary left back as such. I think Celtic will still bring another left back in. It might be a loan move, but I do think Celtic will bring a left back in. I wonder if Inamura will go out. So I'm not saying he's a worst signing, I'm just saying he's one that I'm not sure will feature this season. The other end of the spectrum, we speak about Callum Osmond. Again, I think he's a really good signing for the future, but I think his future this season will either be elsewhere or kind of on the fringes. And then beyond that, I think it's just we've not seen enough of guys. We've not seen Jemai Simpson-Pusey at the time of recording. We've not seen him yet. We've only seen Shinyamada a couple of times as well. So I think there's a lot to learn about these players, and before we make a definitive verdict on them. And then there's more to come, probably.
Yep, Shinyamada's probably the one, if we talk about one to watch, where of what we've seen, there seems to be maybe the most excitement there. Just because he's a striker, fans want a new goal scorer, but that bit of an outing he got in pre-season, he certainly got about, he looked busy. There's something there, again, a good age too for Celtic.
Yeah, I think he's a really interesting player, and it's always a strange one. It was the same, I remember when Rio Hatate signed for Celtic, and you look at his age, and I think it was probably 23, 24 at the time, but he hadn't played a lot of football.
Mm-hmm. We weren't even sure of his position, remember? We thought he could play left back as well.
And he's a centre, and I think Postecoglou had said, no, he's a centre midfielder. He'd watched enough of him to know that. Enough. Shinyamada is a player who again came through university system, had a brilliant season in the J-League last year. And that's clearly why Celtic signed him, because when he was speaking after they signed, he said he basically knew about Celtic's interest in January. So Celtic have had a long-standing interest.
We've seen bits of him pre-season where he looked sharp and looked busy, his run's been intelligent. He maybe fits that profile of one to watch for the season.
Yeah, I think he is a player that, probably off the back of Daisen Maeda, Rio Hatate, Kyogo Furuhashi, the impact they made at Celtic, if you're getting another guy from the J-League who had a really good season last year, third top goal scorer, I think, and that's clearly what won him his move. There was a lot of eyebrows raised given his track record this season, the first half of this season, but Celtic as he said himself when he was signed with Celtic, he's known about this since January, basically. Kawasaki Frontale wanted to keep him for the Asian Champions League. They got all the way to the final, the game which he featured in. So he's played at a good level. He's not got a huge amount of football behind him purely because of the university system. I'm talking about first team football. However, I think he showed enough in the Como Cup, and even when he came on against Aberdeen, which is a difficult game to come into, and pretty frenetic at the time in Aberdeen are coming in. He's quick. There's stuff he has to brush up on, but I think he's a player that can probably surprise people this time. And I think the big thing about Yamada as well is this is his big chance in European football. He's been pretty public in the last maybe year or so that he always wanted a chance to come into, whether it was Great Britain or different places in Europe, and really test himself and show that he can do it and make a transition like so many Japanese players have done over the years. So he's hungry. He's clearly a very good professional. He's clearly a guy who will be able to settle a bit quicker, given that he's got a lot of compatriots around him. And I think he'll actually suit Scottish football. He's really bustling. He's a guy who'll get in about, make chances for himself, good in the air as well. And I think if Celtic can get into the groove that they will get in when the other wingers arrive, and they will arrive, that's me saying that again, I think he'll get loads of chances. I think he's a really good player for the value that Celtic got for him. It was just over £1 million or something they spent on him. I think he's one that can really make a contribution this season.
So one player who is already making contributions, we'll kind of round off by looking at Benjamin Negrren. Don't want to start touting players for moves elsewhere already, but what is he capable of at Celtic? Because he looks a proper talent.
Yeah, look, he's again a guy who has a track record, and we've spoken about how he was a Swedish wonder kid at 16, 17. He got his move, never really worked out, went and kind of rebuilt his career at Nordsjælland. And I think it coincided, he blossomed, it coincided with his contract situation, which meant Celtic could steal in and get him for a snip, let's be honest. And by the time Celtic signed him, he was a full Sweden internationalist. He's a guy who John Dahl Tomasson really, really likes, who will play for Sweden going forward. I know he's got tough competition. Bizarrely, Sweden play him as a kind of second striker, even though he's played as a centre midfielder. When he signed, there was a bit of dubiety would he play as a winger for Celtic, but he did play a bit for Nordsjælland, number 10. Brendan Rodgers sees him as a number 8. You speak to people about Negrren who are watching him and guys in the game and stuff like that, they always talk about how mobile he is, how he glides about, he's got great legs in him, but he's also got a goal threat. I just think he looks after the ball so well. And I think the reason he's playing just now in Celtic's first choice team ahead of Arne Engels, if you want to talk about Paulo Bernardo, it's probably unfair to put Luke McCown in because he has a real goal threat. Negrren's got a goal threat in him. He nearly scored against St Mirren, hit the woodwork, took his goal against Aberdeen really well. But I just think he recycles the ball well, he moves well, he gets on the ball. And when you think of what Celtic paid for him, probably just under £2 million for a guy of that pedigree, that age, international status. What would he cost in the open market? And that's when I think you need to bring it back in. There's so much board bashing going on just now, and that Celtic's transfer business, the manager said, has yet to be satisfactory. They're down in numbers, but you need to give credit where it's due, and I think Benjamin Negrren in this modern age is a really good signing.
So you guys at home, let us know what you think. Who's been your signing of the summer? Who are you not quite convinced about yet? And indeed, who do you want to see come in? Now, stay tuned to our YouTube channel. If you want to hear about Billy Dodds and whether he could have signed for Celtic, then check out the latest one-to-one Derek McGregor alongside the now former Rangers coach. And we'll also have Go Ballistic on Monday, a Rangers transfer special, and back again here next Friday for your next Celtic transfer special.